Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and I just saw Morbius, the latest comic book film released in Sony's expanding cinematic universe based on different characters from Marvel Comics. The first part of this video will be spoiler-free, and then we will be getting into spoilers, so you can decide for yourself how much or how little of this video review you would like to watch. My expectations going into watching Morbius were pretty open. I think a lot of people had decided that they already disliked it before even seeing it. Since it's not a character I'm all that familiar with, I was willing to just let it be whatever it was going to be and judge that accordingly. In a general sense, I enjoyed the film because of the fact that this was not one of the more established comic book characters with a large presence in live-action media. It was interesting getting to follow the journey of the film, introducing me to who Dr. Michael Morbius was, what his powers were once he got those powers, and pondering what sort of things they might try to do with him next. It was refreshing to watch a comic book film without having a bunch of baggage going into it, where you inevitably end up comparing it to loads of other versions of that character that other actors have played and other directors have already put their stamp on. We are in an age where franchises, and in particular comic book media, have become a juggernaut of what Hollywood is producing, so I would rather see more films like Morbius where we can be introduced to characters that have not previously had their own feature films or even television series made before. I liked a lot of the visuals in the film. The director, Daniel Espinosa, wasn't someone whose work I was familiar with beforehand, but I really liked his visual style in the film. I had almost wondered if he was another director that had come from a horror background, since although it's a different cinematic universe, the DCEU has shown that horror is a good place to go to find interesting directors like James Wan and David F. Sandberg, so maybe Sony would want to try out a similar strategy. But once I looked into Daniel, I didn't find that. I only found some action films, some propaganda. I may check out Snabba Cash though, if I can track it down, since that stars Joel Kinnaman, and I would be intrigued to see both him as an actor and Daniel as a director earlier on in their careers and see how they've evolved since then. There was a particular sequence in Morbius in a hallway that I really liked. It had very cool lighting and effective building of tension. Considering how it's nearly impossible for any of these comic book blockbusters to get signed off on unless they agree to stay within a PG-13 rating, I felt like Morbius did well to do as much as they could in a darker tone and aesthetic while working under the constraints of that rating. Far too many comic book films are insufferably kid-friendly and quippy to the point of undermining your own dramatic stakes, so Morbius, being a film that doesn't pander as hard in that way, made it a more refreshing film to watch. Sony has recently found a new wave of success because of two main things. They're collaborating with Disney to let them have Spider-Man overlap into the MCU, and the thing that I personally have enjoyed more, the Venom films. So that was really what incentivized me to look forward to Morbius as an expansion of that. I want to see what Sony will do in their own little corner of weirdness, and I say that with love. I suppose going into Morbius, I was wondering if they were going to embrace that 2000s gothy, vampy aesthetic that I've certainly had my fair share of fun watching over the years. We're talking about Blade 1 and Blade 2, because in my mind, Blade 3 does not exist, or films like Queen of the Damned. Also, Jennifer Garner slicing and dicing sandbags while Evanescence plays at full volume. Morbius didn't fully go there, aesthetically speaking. If they had, we probably would have gotten a banging soundtrack, but I still liked the concept they were going for, which was more of a straightforward supernatural horror interpretation of the superhero genre. The best performances of the film were, of course, Matt Smith and Jared Leto. To be fair to the other people in the cast, though, there was not a whole lot of material given to them to really showcase themselves. The action was very heavy on visual effects, which made sense given the film's premise. I didn't mind that it was heavy on that, but I can understand why some people liked that less. Presumably those viewers wanted things to be more visible for them than they were. However, I think it's worth noting that the film did try to play around with perspective, so you could sometimes see the action and the powers from an outside perspective, and then other times you would see that action from the perspective of the people who have superpowers, which also proved to be good for the storytelling and world building so that the audience can understand what the capabilities of these superpowers are. For me, if I were to criticize something about Morbius as a film, it was that there were certain things in the story that I found interesting and I wanted to learn more about and see more of, but sometimes the potential of of those things in the premise and in the story were not always realized. There's a fair bit of time spent in the beginning of the film building up the origins of our two main characters and also the origins of these vampiric abilities. Once the action gets going, it stays pretty high octane, and part of me wonders if it might have been a little better if we could have had more time in between those action sequences to have more dramatic material, conversations, and exchanges to better flesh out some of the characters and the relationships that they had with each other. But overall, I liked the style of the film, I liked the concept, and I see a lot of potential for Morbius to better develop and offer something different in the increasingly crowded market of live-action comic book entertainment media. That's probably sufficient enough feedback for the spoiler-free section, so I would like to talk about spoilers now, since I am assuming the section of my audience that likes comic book films will have already seen or will be seeing the film while it's out in cinemas and will want to unpack some more of the specifics of the story and the characters. Morbius is a film that felt familiar, but I personally didn't feel like it was as derivative as some of the harsher opinions on the Bird app seem to be treating it as. There are some very classic elements in the story. Vampires have a huge presence in fiction and in pop culture, things like Dracula, Blade, Twilight, but it's been a while since they've really taken center stage, so I liked that we were getting a return to vampirism as well as a different version of that concept. I really enjoyed the visual presentation of showing what exactly Michael's abilities are, and I do think it was important to do this because it is a different version of vampirism than what we normally see on screen, and it's important for the audience to clearly understand what he can or cannot do. If this was following a well-established template that the masses already are familiar with, you wouldn't have had to do that. I also liked the visual effects for explaining and showing Michael's powers of echolocation. Of course, it's easy to get swept up enjoying the more acrobatic and flying powers of Morbius, but the echolocation felt really fresh and unique to this reimagined take on vampirism. I can understand why some people didn't enjoy the action as much, but for me personally, I didn't mind it. For this character to continue in other films, I hope that we will be able to get more of a mix with the practical combat and VFX for action sequences, because I think that having that practical action brings more intimacy to the action and the dramatic stakes of that action when you can actually really see the actors performing it instead of relying just on a digital rendering of them. That's just my opinion. It's no disrespect to the art of VFX, and I'm not saying that we should get rid of the VFX entirely. I would just like it if they slightly altered the ratio. I really enjoyed the flashback sequences and how effective they were in informing the audience about both of the main characters as individuals, but also the relationship that they had with each other. That shared history was essential to the story because there really wasn't as much as you might have expected in the runtime of being able to see them in the present timeline, showing the depth of the friendship that they have with one another. Knowing that they have this history and have been friends for as long as they have was an important foundation for the dramatic and emotional stakes of what happens in the present storyline. You can see very early on that Michael is a caregiver, even if he tries to play it off like he's not going to get emotionally attached. That's why he keeps calling every new kid Milo. You get to understand that he's been emotionally traumatized by the experience of having these long-term medical problems, but also the fact that he keeps making and losing friends because of their health problems. But despite all of that, he tells Milo to not go outside when the kids are being let out of school because they are horrendous, vicious little bullies. And of course, he also fixed the machine in order to save Milo's life. But on the other side of things, you also get that understanding that Milo has been deeply traumatized by his illness, as well as the cruelty of others. He is inclined to take the harm that's been done to him and put that harm back onto others. And the film is not justifying it, of course, but I do think that it's important context to understand Milo as a character. In comic book films, it's pretty classic that the similarities and differences between the main hero and the main villain will be written in such a way that helps you to better understand both of those characters. So when you have both of these characters undergoing the same physical, biochemical transformation and respond to that transformation and use it in completely different ways, that's what ultimately informs you about them as characters, as well as the central themes of the story. But again, Matt Smith as Milo was a real high point of the film. That sequence where he's just embracing being a baddie, that was exactly what I wanted to see. One thing that I didn't understand though was, why was this film only 1 hour and 40 minutes? There were multiple details in the story that I would have loved to see fleshed out more that were just rushed over, even though there was clearly space in the runtime to show it. For example, I get that they were going for the angle of doing a dramatic reveal for Milo having taken the serum or medication, whatever you want to call it, the thing that gives them vampire powers. So he shows up with the cane and then he leaves without it. I am here for that. I am here for a messy villain who lives for the drama. But I still don't see why we wouldn't at some point get to see a flashback of Milo taking it and undergoing that transformation. You could do a lot with 20 minutes, and we're coming off of things like Zack Snyder's Justice League being a huge hit. That was 4 hours long, and then The Batman was recently released, and that was 3 hours long. Now, I'm not suggesting that Morbius should have been 3 or 4 hours, but at the very least, hitting your 2-hour runtime, I feel would have really helped to fill things out. When Milo had that conflict with the man at the bar, it was very clearly setting things up for him to go attack that man. So why wouldn't you show us that? Let me see that creep getting ripped up in an alleyway or something. And another thing that I think was underdeveloped was the romantic subplot, if you can even call it that, between Michael Morbius and Martin. This was peak hetero laziness. You think just because you put a hot man and a hot woman in the same space that it justifies a romantic subplot. No, sir, you have to actually give those actors something to do, either through dialogue, action, longing looks. Give us something so that we as the audience can feel that romantic connection between them. And I'm not at all opposed to you putting a romance into a comic book story. Frank Castle and Karen Page, that was a pairing that had me by the neck every time they had scenes together, and it was in a comic book television series, so you cannot act like you are incapable of putting romance into this space. You can, and you should, but you have to actually make it good. We are coming off of the premiere of Bridgerton Season 2 and The Lost City, which were giving me everything when it came to romance, so you cannot scam me with a mediocre attempt at romance. I love a good romance. Love is the most important quality of a revolutionary, and we already see that Michael has that trait of caring about the well-being of people, so if you're going to make him fall in love, you should do it well. Within the narrative, we get to learn about Michael and his powers through a significant portion of the first chunk of the film, and it made sense given the fact that Michael is a scientist, a doctor, he's doing medical research, that the way he would learn about this is that he would stick himself in a lab and do extensive testing to determine what exactly is going on with him, record data, analyze that data. But the problem is that it felt like a jarring shift to have him on his own for so long to all of a sudden we're supposed to follow this romantic subplot and a ton of action between him and Milo the baddie. That missing 20 minutes really could have done a lot to flesh out more of these characters, the romance, as well as better utilize Jared Harris. There was some great directing and cinematography. I liked a lot of the handheld camera work that we got to see throughout the film, and I appreciated the overall vampire concept and the darker tone. It was interesting to have that moral dilemma and a repeated emphasis on Michael Morbius advocating for the sanctity of human life. I really appreciated that he rejected that award at the beginning of the film, but again, that was another moment where we should have seen him be messy on that stage and politely decline the award instead of just him dealing with the fallout of it afterwards. That could have been a great character moment. This is what I mean, where they would do things that I would like, but they wouldn't fully commit to whatever the concept was. Like I said, there was a lot of potential with this film, and I hope that they figure out which parts worked well and do more of those things in any future films or appearances of this character, as well as improve on the aspects that were underdeveloped. I don't really get why so many people were hostile to the degree that they were against Morbius as a film. For me as a viewer that is becoming increasingly tired of the abundance of superhero media, I thought that the film felt fresh compared to the gray sludge a lot of other superhero films and franchises have become over the last decade or so. It had areas that it could improve on, but I still enjoyed myself overall. Maybe if they do a sequel, they will find their footing a bit more, kind of like how Venom Let There Be Carnage was able able to have fun with their concept and deliver more of what the audience loved about the first one. So those are my main thoughts on Morbius. If you've seen the film, let me know what you thought of it. Stay tuned for more Bridgerton videos. I've already started writing my next one, the first of several more videos about season 2 that I will be doing, since clearly I have a lot to say about it. See you in the next one. Bye.